And so I'll introduce to our first speaker. And everybody's promised to try to keep it quite short, because a lot of the value is going to be in the conversations that we actually have after the presentations. Okay, so I'll introduce Brian Spack, and I'm just going to read correctly his bio. So Brian Spack is the General Manager of Advocacy and Policy for Energy Consumers Australia, the national voice for household and business energy consumers. Prior to joining ECA, Brian led CSIRO's research program on energy networks in integrating renewable energy. Prior to that, he led product development for Portland General Electric, a vertically integrated utility in the US, and was a clean energy lobbyist in Washington, DC. So with any luck, we have Brian, who's been able to navigate the issues we've had and can speak to that. If we don't see Brian in the next...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. I was just standard problem at the end there. I was just muted. Apologies, everyone. Well, thank you. First, thanks for coming and thanks for having me. Apologies that it's taken a bit here.
We're not hearing anything.
Sort the tech.
I am.
Yeah, that's
I
how
can
I can
hear
hear you. I can hear you too. So
it sounds like maybe if you most people can hear, so if you can't, I think that might be on the whoever's having trouble hearing your computer's end. Okay, let me. I don't want to belabor the point. I'm really going to talk about the rule change and where we are in that process. So, I guess I really wanted to talk about kind of three different things: the process here of this rule change, the some perspective about where consumers are and how we design for consumers, and last but not least, kind of the need for ongoing review. So I think just to start off, it's worth reflecting on the value of the rule change process. Anyone in Australia, from the energy minister to my mate who lives upstairs from me, can submit a rule change proposal, and if it has merit, the AEMC should consider it. We submitted a rule change proposal. I'm glad that the AEMC has considered it and undertaken a consultation process. It's a benefit of our democracy and of a meritocratic and sort of technocratic way of making decisions. I think it's a really novel aspect of the energy policy space that hopefully leads to better rules and governance. I think some of what you might hear today it may be somewhat critical of the directions paper that the AEMC recently published. I didn't love everything in that directions paper, but I guess I wanted to also say that I think that's okay. That's the point of the directions paper in a certain sense, is for the Commission to get feedback on initial thinking and then hopefully adjust as more evidence and better evidence comes into view. So I certainly have no expectation that every step of a process is perfect, but I think a good process can lead to a good outcome, and that's certainly my hope here. Okay, so on our rule change specifically, I appreciate probably not all of you have read it. So I really, there's three key components, depending on how you want to count them, to our rule change. It was that all consumers should have access to energy consumption data in a format that makes sense to them and in real time and at no additional cost. My read of where this rule change has gone is it's really just focused on that real-time aspect of our rule change and not necessarily in a format that it makes sense to consumers and not at no additional cost. And so we're still, I think from energy consumers' perspective, ECA's perspective, the organization, we're still at, we want to find a way that we help all consumers in the transition, not just those who can't afford to pay additional money for real-time data access. So where are consumers in this journey? I guess, so I'm going to go, use some of our survey data. As you would know, ECA is well known for doing ongoing surveys of household and small business energy consumers across Australia that are statistically significant and give us indication of what people actually think. So, last year, or in 2023, 78% of households said they were interested in information about how appliance use could change their energy bill. That's a lot, 78%. That's how many people love their mother, right? 66% said they're interested in how smart meters can help them save money on their energy bills. And then I want to give you some additional data points from our most recent survey that was conducted late last year. And so we asked people who are on a time of use energy plan already and who say they sometimes or regularly change their appliance use as a result of being on that time of use plan. So this is a subset of customers. But we asked them which appliances do they change, and only 2 appliances did more than 50% of those customers say they actually changed their usage. 73% of households said that they changed when they wash their clothes, their washing machine, and 58% of customers said they change when they use their dishwasher. If you know a lot about appliance energy use, the dishwasher and the washing machine really don't use very much energy. They are a fraction of total energy use, particularly the appliances themselves. They influence some hot water use, and hot water is a major energy user for many households. But those 2 appliances in and of themselves really have a fractional use of energy. And so some of that is reflects on the fact that really consumers don't know today how their energy use influences their bills. Even the customers who clearly want to know and have signed up for these plans, or who are actively participating in a time of use plan. And those are the households in many ways that we issued this rule change to support. So I'm going to make a quick analogy to the banking sector. 64% of households use some type of mobile banking app, and I think I use it too. I'm a pretty budget conscious person, and I regularly go online and check my account balance, and will see instantaneously when I've gone to the grocery store and made a big purchase. It immediately is taken off my account. And the fact that in the electricity sector, we can't provide that same type of data and insight to consumers, I think is confusing to people. It doesn't align with their expectation for where kind of modern technology is today. And I think it's something that we really need to look at and to change. So I think one thing that's important in the context of thinking about some solutions, if everybody should maybe go on mute because there's some background noise. Thanks. One of the things I learned really while working at the CSIRO is if you're trying to build products around data, there's the classic mistake that people make, and I've made this mistake in my life, is that you start first from the data and then you think about what can people use, what can people do with it. The better way of developing a product is to start with what consumers want, what you can imagine them wanting to do, the jobs they want to do, and then you backfill the data they need to accomplish them. And I think on this, like, if we're really trying to help people understand their energy use, the directions paper talks a little bit about the value of historic data, and then sort of creates this, I think, difficult situation where they talk about, well, some consumers, consumers have access, or some consumers have access to that data today, but they don't really use it. But it's not necessarily as useful as real-time data would be, or other insights on that data. So one example of this, right, is if I want to see how much energy use my dishwasher causes, or my clothes washer causes, if I can turn it on and then watch on the app, actually watch on my phone the actual consumption that takes, I have more insight about my energy use. Alternatively, maybe there is a value here in, even if, because, and I don't know the true costs around real-time data access. Other people, I think, on this call and in the audience probably know more about this than I do. But if it's true that the costs outweigh the benefits, I am certain that there are artificial intelligence technologies today that can interrogate historic data use and identify the likely appliance use. Some of that's done better if it's actually at the site, but some of it can be done just by disaggregating data, especially if you know a little bit about the household. And so there's all these opportunities to help consumers here. And I think where the direction paper lands right now, it's really focused on a very small subset of customers, and really the most the most well-off customers, by statistically speaking, and those are the people with batteries who are most useful, like real-time data access that they can pay for. It might be particularly useful for people with a battery who can change its charge or update its charge and discharge schedule, in close to real time. And that is a benefit. Like, there's no doubt there will be overall system benefits to that and savings for that individual household. And so we should preserve those. But we also need to look more broadly at the whole range of consumers and see how we can ensure that they're getting direct benefit from smart meters. I'm a big believer in smart meters. I think they provide lots of value for the entire energy system, but there's an important social license aspect to the transition and to smart meters that means you need to ensure that at the very least consumers do not see a reduction in the value they perceive from electricity from being on a smart meter. And ideally, they get more value, direct value out of it. And that's through insight that their consumption data can offer them. So I think that's really, from my perspective, got to be a key focus going forward, is how do we provide more insight for households on how to reduce their bill from their smart meter data. A couple other things I wanted to say, and then I'll give it back to the panel. So I think I spoke at the beginning about the value of this process and the review. I would agree. With saying that, I would highlight that I think there needs to be greater validation of the costs in here. As I mentioned a minute ago, I'm not an expert on the true costs of real-time data, but I don't feel from reading the directions paper that I have been convinced that the AEMC has great data points on that either. Personally, if I were in charge of the AEMC and had the funding to allow this, which I don't think is a ton of funding, by the way, I would hire an engineering firm to do an independent analysis of the true costs associated with providing real-time data access now and into the immediate future, and try and, instead of relying solely on a bunch of stakeholder input to determine that, I would actually hire an independent expert to go analyze, find what the true material costs are to improving smart meters to provide real-time data, including the potential telecoms costs, and make some recommendations on that basis. So I think that could be really good, or that's an opportunity for improvement within this process. I think the other review aspect is, I really think there's an ongoing need for the AER to do review and monitoring of whatever comes out of this process, but probably more generally out of the smart meter rollout holistically. The smart meter rollout, yes, was justified primarily on the remote bill reading benefits, but identified a number of other benefits that come from better data to the system. There's a need for an ongoing understanding of whether or not we're tracking as a sector towards those benefits, and if not, what's holding us back. I guess, and then I just wanted to end really quickly on a favorite paper of mine. It's a classic business paper from 1990 called "The Dynamo and the Computer: An Historical Perspective on the Modern Productivity Paradox." You may have missed it in your bedtime reading, but what it talks about really, it looks at digitalization in the 1990s, and the famous quote is, "You see the computers everywhere, but in the productivity stats, like it's not showing up in overall economic productivity." Why is that? Why was that happening in the 1990s? Computers been around for 30, 40 years at that point. And they look back at electrification, at the history of electrifying buildings, to try and understand general purpose technologies like electrification, like digital technologies, and how those technologies influence economies over time. And one of the things they find is that there are all these benefits to electrification that people didn't identify at first. There was a significant reduction in fires, right? And because people previously had a lot of fires burning within buildings. Buildings could be built with much less weaker foundations and not quite as rigidly as they needed to be if they were if they were using a lot of heavy machinery that was required from steam turbines. And so there are all these these benefits that no one had articulated or could foresee at the beginning of electrification that turned out to be true and flowed through the entire economy. The lesson there is that there's benefits to general purpose technologies that we cannot identify yet. I think that's absolutely true for smart meters and the data that they produce. And it's important that we think about those benefits and in the overall cost benefit analysis that we're doing on these future use cases that we can't quite identify yet, but that are certain to emerge. So with that, I'll send it back.
Fantastic. That's fascinating. I'd love a copy of that paper, Ryan. It's sorry, Brian. It's sounds fascinating. So we'll just move along quite rapidly. And if it's okay, I'd actually ask people if they would like to ask questions to put them in the chat now. If for some reason we don't get to them in this session, we'll definitely try to get some feedback on these when we send out a kind of high-level dot point summary of this webinar afterwards. So Darren Gladman is our next expert panelist. He's the Head of Policy and Regulatory Affairs for the global inverter manufacturer SMA. He has been active in climate and energy policy since the 1990s and led the reform agenda for distributed energy in the Clean Energy Council from 2012 to 2020. Prior to that, Darren worked with the Victorian Government and a range of NGOs. So, Darren, thank you so much for speaking today.
Thank you, Marianne. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and hopefully everyone can see or at least hear me. So before the directions paper came out, Varian had asked what our subject matter would be, and I took a bit of a punt and said, okay, I'll do cybersecurity and privacy because I think they're important issues. I think they're overlooked issues in our electricity reform agenda, and I was hopeful that this reform for real-time data would also be an opportunity that the AEMC would take to review those areas. So with that as context, and thanks, Brian, for a stellar introduction to the issue broadly, I will just give a very quick overview of my take on the directions paper. which I assume many of you haven't had a chance to read yet. And I'll start with the positive. So I think it's positive that the AEMC has undertaken this reform in the first place. I was delighted when Energy Consumers Australia put this forward as a rule change. I think it's a recognition that personal data is like a multi-trillion-dollar industry. It's people, you would have heard cliches, and I won't repeat all of them, but, it's the new oil, it's the new gas. It's all about you. It's all about your data. And so it was very timely that this rule change was put forward. And I was also pleased when I first started reading the directions paper to see, the AEMC supports this. This is really good. So, from a high-level principle point of view, my initial response was to be delighted. I think someone's got their mic on, so if you could silence, thank you. However, I think I'm not delighted with all of the proposed implementation. Somebody has their mic on. If you could silence that, that would be great. So I will get on to what I said was going to be my topic, which is cybersecurity and privacy. But before I do that, I've just got to touch on one issue because it's I'm still at a bit of a loss to understand it, which is the proposal for 15 years. It's like 15 years in this industry is absolutely forever. I've been working in solar for nearly that long with breaks in between, and the industry is just unrecognisable now compared to what it was 15 years ago. The idea of setting a requirement for new products that doesn't become mandatory for 15 years boggles my mind. If you're an inverter manufacturer and if there's a new standard, you've got 12 months to adjust. And inverter standards are far more complex than taking real-time data, which, the AEMC said in its consultation paper is already there in the meter. It just needs to be made accessible. And to think that we have to wait until 2040 before the products can be updated to enable that functionality is very, very difficult to understand. However, that wasn't the topic of that I said I would talk about, so I'll do what I said I would do and focus on the implications of this reform for both cybersecurity and privacy of personal energy data. Now, initially I thought I would have very little to say on this because if you go to page 29 of the directions paper, it states, at this stage, we, that is the AEMC, do not consider that local access to real-time data poses any increased privacy or cybersecurity risks to consumers. So I think, oh, okay, well, I won't have much to talk about tomorrow, will I? But then you read the directions paper a little bit more and you get to chapter 8, I think it is, and you see that cybersecurity is cited as a reason why some reform proposals can't proceed around access to third-party access to smart meters. Now, I'm not suggesting those positions are contradictory because they're addressing different ends of the reform proposal, I guess. However, I think that the solution to that proposals that are examined in Chapter 8, which is cybersecurity is a concern, therefore we need to limit competition or access for the time being, might be an appropriate short-term response, but it's not the right long-term response. And so the right long-term response is in what's proposed or mentioned in the directions paper, I think, which is a form of accreditation process for third parties who do want access to real-time customer data. And it's worth bearing in mind in all of this that the context for this is there are no cybersecurity standards for CER in Australia at this stage. The Cybersecurity Act was passed prior to Christmas last year. When the ministerial rules were in the process of being made, they'll be commencing in 2026. So from next year, we can expect the commencement of some pretty basic cybersecurity rules. But at this stage, there really is no protections in, no positive obligations on the likes of inverter OEMs, technology providers, and those in a similar space, either in the Privacy Act or in the NER. And closely related but different is privacy of personal energy data. I think without cybersecurity, you have no privacy because your data can be taken by parties that don't have the right to take it, and there goes your privacy. However, just cybersecurity on its own is not a guarantee of privacy because there's no guarantee that those who are authorised to have that data and who may be cyber secure will use it in the appropriate way. So I agree with the AEMC when they say real-time data contains personal and sensitive information about consumer behaviour, which third parties could misuse. Oh, by the way, there's a PowerPoint presentation on all this, but I won't talk to the PowerPoint, but it's available from the organisers afterwards if anyone wants it. So OEMs, inverter manufacturers and technology providers, many of us have access to a lot of your energy data, and we're not covered by legislation. We're not covered by the NER. It really comes down to trusting companies to use your data responsibly. And not only that, many of these companies will be holding your data on a computer server in another country. It's not even clear which country's legislation governs the privacy of your personal data. Some people might be okay with that. Some people might not. I know people have different approaches and standards to the sharing of their own personal data. However, I think the proposal to accredit third parties to access consumer data is a good one, irrespective of whether customers are comfortable having all of their data shared with anyone or whether they would rather that be treated privately. And lastly, as in terms of issues related to this, is the question of consent. The question of consent is a problematic one in the NER, and I won't go into any. I could provide some examples that real life examples, but I won't for the purposes of time. However, I think the proposal for a centralised online consent form managed by either the AEMO or the AER is a very good one in terms of both minimising cost and red tape, but also putting in place a robust framework to protect consumers and make sure that we follow their wishes. So where does all this leave us? I think it leaves us with a bunch of known unknowns, things that if we knew the answer to them now, this would be an easier task. Brian touched on one of those, which is future trends with meter costs and capabilities, or even the costs right now. We don't know when some meters will have real-time data access as a standard feature, but I think it shouldn't be that far away. We don't know how long it will take for those meters with real-time data access to reduce in price so that they're comparable or the same as meters without that feature. We don't know how quickly the NEM will adopt cybersecurity provisions and protection for privacy. And the question for me is if we knew the answers to those questions, would we really suggest 2040 as a start date? I really don't think so. I think 2040 is ludicrous, but I do understand the AEMC is in a difficult position and doesn't have a crystal ball. So I guess the thing I'd end with is let's get as much as we can from this rule change But I would be deeply disappointed if we went away from this rule change knowing that nothing is going to change until 2040. So I would be hopeful that we could at least build in a review process in 2 or 3 years' time, by which time the AER has done its job, it's gathered information, we know prices, we know about cybersecurity and protection of personal private data, and we're better placed to say, well, do we really need to wait until 2040 before we can introduce this functionality as a standard feature for all new smart meters? And I'll hand it back to the facilitator with that. Look forward to the panel discussion.
Thanks so much, Darren. That was really insightful, really interesting. And just to, I guess, to highlight to everybody else on the call that that particular point on the 15 is something that there's been a lot of in the background discussion on prior to this call, and I've got no doubt that when it's Tim's turn that he'll be speaking to that as well pretty passionately. So we'll move along. There's some very interesting questions in the chat, but I'm also conscious of people having meetings and trying to keep to time as well. But so I'll now introduce Dr. Andrew Mears. He's an engineer, entrepreneur and thought leader with over 25 years in renewable energy, climate technology and innovation management. He's CEO of a new company, Tesseract ESS, and which provides energy storage services to commercial and industrial clients. He founded and led Switched In, which many of you will know quite well, a CER software provider, and has held leadership roles in clean tech, academia, and with the UN and World Bank in Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. Dr. Mears actively contributes to energy policy and promotes university-led collaboration, and today he'll be talking about this topic on real-time energy data in relation to consumers, businesses, and optimizing energy use. I guess through the lens of accelerating the energy system transition to a more flexible energy system. So we look forward to hearing from Andrew.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Marianne. Thanks, colleagues. Look, I mean, I think this is a terribly exciting opportunity. Sort of having been, I guess, one of the sort of first players looking at how we could scale the impact of CERs in the Australian market. Access to data at the grid connection point was always a challenge, and I had the fortunate experience to be able to engage across the industry with metering manufacturers and retailers and networks around these issues. Unfortunately, what's emerged is a very haphazard and messy arrangement. Just the other day, I was visiting a customer site and looking at their switchboard and their metering arrangement, just for fun as I do. They had in place about 5 different energy monitoring or metering devices. And this was a small company. They were interested in managing their load, having more visibility. They had a solar and a battery system. They had a load disaggregation tool that would allow them to look specifically, by analysing their metering data to get more insights into how their individual loads were performing. They were trying to make use of all this data, and the consequence was that they had these 5 meters, each with 3 CTs. So pretty early on in that experience, they ended up having to add another distribution board just to fit these different appliances. I mean, I can relate to other projects where you come and you find all these CTs clipped in and the device monitoring devices themselves dangling underneath. I mean, of course, that's not good practice. But I guess what it underpins is that homes and businesses want real-time access to data. That's the key message here. And I think let's look and see why that is the case. There's definitely a few geeks in these companies that are keen to manage these things. A few engineers run riot. But the underlying message is that there is tangible value to business to have this real-time visibility. Of course, the same drivers are what's driving the growth of solar and batteries, and ultimately this will change, that consumers want to have more power and control because there's tangible value in that for them. I think this has moved well past an early adopter context. I think you don't need to have a geeky engineer in the company or a geeky teenager in the house to be wanting or seeing value from this real-time data. Solar and batteries we've seen go through a transition. We had solar being installed where the DNSPs were struggling to maintain the type of hosting that's required. So we saw export constraints come in. So solar PV would need to install a meter so they could manage export to the grid. Similarly with batteries, batteries provided more opportunities for the customer to get more value from their solar asset. Lo and behold, another meter comes along. Similarly now, with V2G emerging, we're going to need to have regulation of these assets into the market. In some states, we're moving to the network is looking to tackle these approaches more systemically with the introduction of dynamic operating envelopes or flexible export arrangements. This requires another interaction with the devices to control either externally or by coordinating locally on the site. We're seeing, for example, in South Australia, a large-scale deployment or trial around home energy management solutions, which is really designed to start to bring value to the customer about having all these additional flexible assets. Of course, the point of coordination is at that meter. That meter represents the legal boundary on the household and on the network. It's the cash register of this arrangement. It's the single source of truth in this scenario. The complexity of the current arrangements is severely limiting customers' ability to access that value. Virtual power plants, more broadly, looking to coordinate these assets into the market, are needing to make changes in time periods which are much faster than the time periods currently supported by the billing meter data that's available. Of course, this limits the value again that customers can get. Having access to real-time data is often something that many of these operators are overlaying, or they're relying upon the metering services supported, or the measurement services supported by the inverters. So, we've seen a recognition of the shift in the dynamic nature of this data and the requirements. We've gone from half an hour to 15 minutes, 5 minutes in some cases. This is also, we need faster real-time data if we're really going to access the opportunities that come from owning and operating these assets into markets. I think having access to this data would have made my life at Switched In so much easier. It would have made these services much more accessible to our customers. And I think it would have created a much more competitive landscape for these types of energy management services. So when I look at the rule change, I think, for example, that we need to also recognise the meter as the single source of truth. Currents and voltages and phase angles are the primary data, but power and energy, real and reactive power and energy are calculated quantities typically. We need to make sure that the meter is a single source of truth, even for this real-time data, as this is the basis on which customers will be accessing a range of new services. I think as we emerge with DOEs, being able to maximise, operate these assets in order to get the most value out of the assets and throughput through the grid means that we're also going to be meeting sort of legal constraints around how we operate in our connection with the grid. So I think it's very important that that we have access, that the meter perhaps it takes on that legal context, even at this real-time level for these important pieces of data. So it is the single source of truth, and it needs to continue to be that. We need to be careful that this real-time data stream doesn't, even though it serves a different purpose, a different application, it doesn't lose the legal weight that the metering, the use of the data for metering should acquire. I guess the other opportunity here is the liberation of these data streams for more innovation. Optimizing the use of flexible assets in the home, providing that fast real-time data, especially with the opportunities that are emerging from new flexible assets like batteries and electric vehicles, but also in the electrification journey, the introduction of flexible heat pumps will deliver those other benefits that we're seeing. And we can't really, I think the imagination can fill lots of gaps there around what future value this could bring. The application of that high frequency data, for example, around giving customers more information about their individual asset performance, load disaggregation, being able to analyze customers' behavior at that higher frequency, unlocks a lot of value that just isn't available at the moment with the current data streams. And I think it would be great just to estimate the value that's going to come from that type of opportunity. So I think really this is a key piece of the puzzle. Liberating access to real-time data at the billing meter is a piece of the puzzle which is really going to bring home a lot of the developments on the customer side in terms of asset flexibility, energy storage, and the new value streams that's given. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Both you and Brian mentioned the value of, and not necessarily in the terms of doing a cost-benefit analysis, but being able to estimate that real value to consumers, having that flexibility. But those themes of scaling CER, of innovation being unleashed, increasing agency to consumers, the importance of lowering complexity, and having the ability to do that through flexible imports, DOE and other rules too is definitely noted, and that fact that it's there's a tangible value to business, but also to individual consumers as well. Thank you so much for that. So we've got a bunch of questions, which I'm hoping that we're going to get to. Tim Ryan's coming up next. So Tim Ryan is an experienced energy policy and consumer advocate specialist with a deep background in demand side management and real-time data access. So over the years, he's played a key role in shaping regulatory frameworks that support consumer interest in the energy system transition. Tim is very passionate about ensuring customers have a fair and active role in Australia's evolving energy landscape. Delighted to present Tim. He's promised to be restrained. He's very, very passionate about this topic. And I'm sure he's going to kickstart the Q&A session off really, really well. Thanks so much, Tim.
You're on mute, Tim.
Is that better? Sorry.
Yep, that's working.
Okay. Righto. So I've got my hand raised for some reason. That's how I got control back on the mic. So listen, the important thing is the AEMC is on the right path. They've been pretty clear about their view of where they are with going with customer centricity and what their strategic direction is. But they haven't got to the destination with this. They've been waylaid by a few vagabonds and trolls under the bridges, etc., that are stopping a lot of consumer benefits. A couple of narrative points we should touch on from what they said. The AEMC has said that we can potentially save on electricity bills. No, the consumers will save, and it will particularly save if the AEMC's tariff review delivers on the reforms that it's trying to address here. The really crucial thing is that real-time data access for the consumer, and more importantly, their devices, and as Andrew touched on, using the meter as a source of truth, or I actually prefer just a source of reference because it actually may not be the truth, but notwithstanding that, it's a reference point that other meters can use or services with. And if we look at the unlocking CER benefits rule change, it works on the principle of subtractive sub-metering. So what the gateway meter says is here's the total. We can do any subtraction underneath that we like with other meters, and ideally those meters should be able to confirm voltage and current differentials, etc., by the 1 Hertz updates. The AEMC has said this is therefore an important piece of the puzzle in delivering the AEMC's vision. It's the key puzzle. It's the centre of the picture, and there's some all the other, foundations that we need to build on. 15 years though, like I'm with Darren, and like you'd get less for murder if you had good behaviour. Not that we can expect good behaviour from any of the incumbents on the space at the moment. We really need to bifurcate this problem of the 15-year thing. It's clearly, when I've discussed it with the AEMC since, the issue is around things like Victoria, which have full penetration of meters, and also the smart meters that are out there. We have to clearly bifurcate this to being, if there's something has to be replaced, if that meter's taken out, can it be used? Can there be some service benefit to go with it? Maybe, maybe not. But any new meter from this day forward, any MC that chooses to put in a meter that doesn't have real-time capability and the consumer wants access to it afterwards, it should be at their cost to replace it. It's not the consumer's problem. Absolutely not. I sort of got a comment here that at the moment they're trying to have this nasty solution that says, oh, we'll cover this. Just think of how daft it would be if you wait until 15 years and then everyone says, oh, all those meters that didn't work within 20 days, give me a new one that does for nothing. Like, it's just, if you take it to the end point of the argument, it's a bit stupid. The other thing we've got to talk about here a bit is the role of the meter. What is it there for, right? At the end of the day, me or you, any one of you, as the homeowner or the renter or whatever, you are paying for that meter. So the role of that meter fundamentally should be addressing your needs, not anyone else's needs. So the problem we've got then is at the moment, as Jill Caney referred to a thing in a link that says the metering coordinator and the retailer's got it and you can ask for your data. That's the billing data, right? And that billing data is being collected for a purpose for billing. Chapter 7 of the NER is explicitly and only for billing. It doesn't convey any other rights to monetize the data, steal the data, do anything with it. It is there for that purpose only. That it has been exploited by some parties who'd like to have 15 years to wrap it up, like Pacific Equity or Brookfield as private equity businesses that want to monetize it and sell it out. Well, good luck to you. Not with my money, you're not. We've got a challenge there that at the moment, IntelliHub on the last valuation, when there was existing funds were raised for further exploitation, was valued on a per meter basis at 5 times the value of what AGL is for the same customers if they were AGL customers. How does that work? You know, it's about IT, subscription services, and robbing us blind and robbing us of our data. The other problem that's in the review report, which I think we'll hopefully get to in the discussions here, is there seems to be a myopia from the AEMC when it talks about benefits is the benefit to the consumer of them having smart real-time data, and they may or may not need it. Actually, that's not where the benefit is. The benefit is actually to the whole community, to businesses and systems that can provide services to businesses, to consumers and businesses to improve a lot. We need to really think about that. The other thing too is there's an error in what the AEMC has written at the moment. It talks about having to third parties get explicit and informed consent to access the data. It's any party. The front and the MC and the metering data service provider have all got to get explicit and informed consent for any and all data from the meter. Now, there are people out there that are saying that they can't afford to put $2 into a meter for a UART and a port for people to be able to export the serial data from it so it'll be just easy to use. But at the same time are putting expensive processors in there to try and disaggregate our signal of our use, to try and do non-intrusive load disaggregation, to peek into what our load is and our house is, to try and drive commercial benefits for the retailer, and in the case of the metering coordinators, for them to add value with services on it. And this is where we get to the next problem, is this thing about security and otherwise. There's a bizarre line in the paper, which I've sort of lost sight of now. It's in chapter 8. It sort of says that, you know, that the MC should have exclusive access to the meter so they can make money and other people can't. But at the same time, that's not anti-competitive. Like, no, you know, that if there is a thing about cybersecurity, and I'm a bit with Darren here, though at the moment there's certain issues around it, but energy is important. It should be that the metering platform is an interoperable platform that allows any party servicing the customer. Remember, it's my meter. I'm paying for the meter. Any party, whether it's Andrew's business or others that are putting all these different services out there around CCIP Oz 2030.5, they're the things that we need to do. I've got a heap of other things I could say, but I really think we should try and get to the questions. I've only used 10 minutes of my 15, but I probably had to give Brian back because he used at least 20. How about we go from there? Anyone got a question to fire in off that, or issues around it? You know, the thing is, we don't want walled gardens. We want interoperability because you've got to remember that there's a stupid line in the thing there that says there's no evidence. There's evidence that it says there is evidence of low consumer demand for real-time data. On that principle, you reckon we wouldn't have mobile phones, we wouldn't have the internet. And John Logie Baird, when he demonstrated television to people, was told it's a lovely invention, but I don't think we'll find a use for it. Real-time data is the key, everyone, and it's our data.
Thanks, Tim. Well done. Very restrained. Kept to time and everything. Impressed. Okay, so we'll kick off the Q&A session. We've got a whole bunch of questions in the chat, like an enormous amount. It's actually difficult to know where to start. I'd actually just invite people to direct a question to somebody on the panel. And also at some point I do need to introduce my co-host, Craig Froome, as well, because he'll be helping to moderate some of this chat and doing a bit of the wrap up as well. So I'm going to introduce my co-host, Craig Froome, right now. So Craig is a principal consultant at Energetic Effects, National Director and Queensland Chair of the Australian Institute of Energy, and an adjunct associate professor in the Centre of Future Materials at the University of Southern Queensland. He's also on the Australian Committee of the World Energy Council. Previously, Craig was Program Manager for the Clean Energy within the University of Queensland's Global Change Institute and a member of the School of Economics, Energy Economics and Management Group, which focused on recent and ongoing technological change and technological diffusion that is making key technologies such as battery storage, solar PV, and thermal more affordable. It's Gabrielle coming back in again. Okay. So
thanks, Barry. I'll wait till the end we'll get through the
Okay.
Q&A.
I've just, David Prince, maybe David, would you like to come off mute and ask your question to kick off the Q&A?
Thank you. I think I put quite a few questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure which one you have in mind, but maybe the one about the one-off charge that the AEMC envisages. Would it be one-off? When would it be payable? What do the experts really think about the one-off charge, particularly as we're in a competitive market here for market offers and for MSP service provision? Isn't it up to the market what it wants to charge customers, assuming that the AEMC the rules don't require it to be free of charge? Or should it just be free of charge, but there's no such thing as free data? If there are costs, then everybody will be paying those costs. But then again, there'll be benefits, and maybe the benefits exceed the costs. Those are my sort of thoughts that are a very long question that everybody can sort of, each of the experts can answer to the point of expertise.
So if I could have a go first, David, the simple thing is if we're talking about broadcast data from a serial port at 1 hertz, which is distributing a pretty limited data set of his voltage, etc., as for reference, current, and other things that go with it, and then processing is done afterwards, the cost to add that to the meter is less than $2. So it's a matter of specifying into the meter that we should have it. If you were trying to add it into the system that says, oh, you've got to pull it through the backhaul, put it on a website, provide access and controls on the website, it starts to get a bit more complex. But literally having it on the device itself, and then providing it as options to add to it as aftermarket things. Look, it'll be as simple as going to Bunnings as it is at the moment and picking up a smart appliance in aisle 30 with the rest of the electrics. So I don't see that as an issue. The problem at the moment is for the metering coordinators and metering data service providers, particularly integrated ones like IntelliHub, which own GreenSync, so they're trying to take control of 30.5, 2030.5 CCFOs. They own EVSE Australia, so they're trying to integrate EV charging. They own Pooled Energy, so they're trying to integrate swimming pumps operations. And the list goes on some of the other things that they're doing. There is a real challenge for the rest of it. So they don't want that data available to anybody else. It's the same as in any other ecosystem. When the New South Wales government first opened up access to transport schedules and where buses were, there was a flurry of applications, and they created a hackathon to create products. And basically, we've now got Trip View out of that, and you can see where your bus is at any time, where your train is, where your ferry is, or anything else. So they're the sorts of things that we have to think about and try and make those available. Any blocking of the ubiquitous access at the meter is a real problem. The other point is if I've got that, then I can choose who to give it to. So I can do something with my DNSP that says, I'll give you real-time data of all the things that you need to know, and you give me back the dynamic operating envelope, and then I can get flexible imports, flexible exports, and drive further benefit and productivity from a network connection. I have people that are saying, hey, look, I'll manage your EV charging service, or I'll provide a better way of managing your hot water. If you look at some of the things that REAM has done, to deliver hot water outcomes from data services when they've put that type of technology in themselves, that's extraordinary. But if we have open data at the meter, then there's $1,000 saving for someone for coming out and putting in separate extra metering to be able to control it. Someone else.
David, I'll attempt a 60-second response. My response would be, I'll pick up on the point that Tim made, where we distinguish between replacing existing meters versus the accelerated rollout. I think the biggest tragedy would be if we have an accelerated rollout of meters that lack the real-time data capability, and we've got a fleet of redundant meters before we've even finished the rollout. So setting aside legacy meters, if what Tim says is correct and the cost per meter is $2, and if I as a customer was offered the option and I was well informed and I knew and I was able to make that choice, that there would be an additional $2 cost in order to future-proof my meter in the event that I might want to put solar on in future, I reckon I'd happily invest $2. But one of the challenges is we lack that data. So $2 sounds convincing, but the AEMC might look into it and say, no, it's not $2, it's $250. And I'm not saying it is, but that might change the equation somewhat.
Look, it is a problem, Darren, and my $2 things is the cost of a serial port and a UART. And if you look at the inside specs of a meter, that's what they do. The trouble at the moment is, and I've talked with the AEMC about this, IntelliHub Brookfield are vertically integrated and own a meter manufacturer. If you talk to some of the other meter manufacturers like Saytech or whatever, who've got great devices, they've invested in trying to have backhaul hosts to bring things to a cloud system and offer a service from that data. You look at the way private equity works, where investment markets work, and where people are trying to drive things out of growth of businesses, everyone's trying to get subscription revenue, and they will deny everything. When the metering review was underway, IntelliHub flat out told the AEMC that they were specifically ordering meters that would have no capacity to provide local access to data. Everything would be through their cloud because of cyber security. It's a furphy, right? I mean, I've been involved in data and information service since the very first online service in Australia, and the focus has to be about the consumer centricity and not about how these businesses make money.
Can't
Can
hear
we
you,
move to another
Varian.
question? Thank you. I wanted to just pick up on Gabrielle's comment, and then Jill Coney has, so Gabrielle Kuiper's made a comment, and Jill Coney's responded to that, which has to do with policies, split incentives, things like that. What happens if I pay for access to my real-time data, then move house? What happens if I rent and then if I move? Because these are the kind of the real implications that can happen to, to the millions of houses that are out there. Maybe Brian, you could speak to that, considering you speak more very closely to, or obviously, Energy Consumers Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Part of what we're dealing with in this in this rule change and in this issue is transaction costs from deregulating the system, and we basically have multiple parties who are all, you know, have their own vested interests, and I think it makes, like, I'm not sure that maybe that is a legitimate question. I read it a little bit as a rhetorical question, and the value of of just making this data free for all customers. I think fundamentally that's the thing that's gotta, we have to wrestle with what's the true cost of making this at some point in the future, maybe because of the existing rollout, but it's not 2040, right? At some point in the near term, what's the true cost of giving everybody access to this? And to what extent are those, you know, are some of these transaction costs increased because we've introduced additional actors into the ecosystem that don't necessarily provide a lot of value besides ring fencing?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just add, I mean, most meters already provide access to, you know, 15-minute data, right? You will have seen on the front of your meter a little window. That's an optical port. Yep. So if you buy a special reader and you put it on that, you can get that data and you can use it to compare with your bill, and people sell applications and devices out there that read from that. So in terms of managing the ownership of that data and the governance, I mean, that's a done deal. It's already been in place. I mean, what we're talking about here is improving the utility for the customer of that data stream. Now, 15-minute data is very useful if it helps you to understand your bill, to have a more immediate feedback instead of waiting until the end of the month or the end of the quarter. But the next step is to make that data certainly richer, a richer data set, and to improve the speed of the measurements that you're getting, reduce the sampling rate. And that means then, of course, that you can see very fast changes in your energy. But certainly the management governance of those data flows, it's a done deal. In fact, it would be a huge step forward just to make that optical meter work faster and deliver a few more data points.
So the only thing with that is there's a couple of things there, Andrew. The first bit is those optical readers aren't that flash hot. If you've got an import-export meter.
So Tim, yeah, I was just talking about the principles.
No. So I'm just sort of in the picture is, but the other thing too, it's about the real-time nature of it. If I want to affect what my energy bill is, and I'm billed on an interval basis of 5 minutes, then I need to know what it is that I'm doing. I don't need to know it after it. So at the moment, the CDR, the consumer data right, says we're entitled to get information from our retailer after the event. That could be next day. That could be on a monthly read. There's a great website called Energy Flex where you can go in and register with the CDR right. Even I've got it there with a 3-month read that actually does it and gets in and does the services around. That doesn't help me. I don't know if you've seen my little video where I'm talking about the Tim Tams and going shopping with no prices. That doesn't help us. So we've got to have the ability for consumers to understand things, their devices to understand things, and those devices to act autonomously with prices around parameters that the consumer has set their own agency. And that's where it's important. And to Jill's question about moving around, that's why this whole idea of charging for having real-time data access is fundamentally a problem. And I think the mistake the AEMC has made in this is trying to make the assessment on benefits at a per consumer level. We really want the 15 to 20% people that have got flexibility be the ones that really lean right into this heavily, and they'll benefit everyone in the consumer. I think, I don't know whether Gabriel's question, which I didn't see taps on this, but Gabriel has written some quite good stuff along the way on talking about how that flexibility for a small number of people can deliver big consumer outcomes.
I might just hop in here and just, I know we've run over time, although we did flag in the advertising that we'd be happy to engage with interested stakeholders and go a little bit over time. There's so many questions here. But there's obviously seems to be a connection point or between the complexity of a change, how consumers are going to be able to deal with that, and then needing or wanting to have a level of agency, but high levels of agency aren't necessarily what consumers want, particularly if it comes with high levels of complexity. So I just thought I might throw that little that one in there. Stir the pot.
To see this thing could get us to the moon or back, and maybe even Mars, because it's got a lot of processing power. People use these all the time. You know, they shop for best prices, they check things, they ask people questions. Brian made the point pretty clearly at the beginning about why we don't have these apps and services there. There's this thing made out that consumers are dumb, stupid, and don't care about what it is for their energy cost. I don't believe it's true. Because
a phone has a high ease of use, though. I'm not quite sure if that's quite fair, because you've got this high ease of use in terms of technology adoption.
If I digitize my energy data, it's accessible on my digital device. I'm not saying that use phones or do whatever. I'm just saying it's about making things accessible. You know, we can check things, access things, and do services around it. We've had load disaggregation since basically the start of the energy system, because if we didn't, the coal-fired power stations wouldn't have had the base load they need to keep alive. You know, we've had off-peak hot water forever with ripple control. That's a digital signal in an analog feed. You know, so I can just see the benefits that go with it, and understanding about the data and the control players. If you know, don't forget, we keep seeming to be forgetting here is we're paying for the meter. And we've got to be asking the question is, what can this Trojan horse stuck on the wall of the horse make sure that I'm the Trojans rather than the Greeks? Or the other way around. I think it's the other way around. I'm going to make sure it's the Greeks bearing gifts. I've got to be the Greeks and the Trojan horse. Is that right?
Look, I guess the point I was making, just steering away from the ancient Greek mythology, was just about technology acceptance and the concept between, you know, you've got the interplay between trust, agency, ease of use, in terms of, you know, when you've got technology acceptance, that, you know, being a bit of a devil's advocate on this one, because obviously these systems need to have a user interface that's going to be something that's going to have a relatively high, you know, it's going to be, there's that the value of having the technology in somebody's home is going to outweigh any complexity on it at the moment, because obviously, you know, this is considered a very niche topic, a very complex topic. There's certainly nobody on this call from the general public, put it that way.
I would be. One of my concerns is that that people will think of this just as another version of people having energy dashboards in their home, and whilst I think that serves a terrific function in the terms of people having more information about their consumption, their patterns of behaviour, I think the real opportunity here is about machine-to-machine coordination. So when we move to a more automation on the side of the customer, how do we coordinate that effectively with our, with the grid, with our, how do we support the legal arrangements that are going to be in place? How do we, and compliance arrangements? And I think that's a whole other area of innovation that needs to be looked at in the context of this real-time data. But certainly, I wouldn't wish anyone on this call to think that this was about energy dashboards solely. This is about automating the home and doing things at a frequency which are handled by machines.
So if I could just give a little distraction for a second. For a very long time, there was two areas of expertise that my stuff in data and transactions applied. Interestingly, one enough was NEMCO when it started, because NEMCO used Channel 7's teletext and data broadcast service to get the prices out to everyone, and that was anyone with a television, but it was for traders, etc., to be able to access the prices, right? But it was available to everybody, just that the consumers couldn't use it. The second one was wagering. Now, wagering is an interesting thing. It's a little bit more regulated than energy, though I've come to feel like that energy might be nearly as regulated. But we went from a situation where the information of pricing was strictly controlled. It was illegal to have prices come off a racetrack. The only off-track betting was through the TAB. And then we came along and introduced digital services and services around that. And the work that I did with the TAB at the time, so when they were trying to introduce their online service, I said, you realise that you are making every one of your customers, you are educating them all to use your competitors. And they went, oh, no, we've got all this control. We've got all the TAB shops, we've got all the pubs, we've got whatever. You go into a pub now, or a TAB agency anyway, everyone's on their phone having a bet with their service. The tab is now number 3 or number 4 as far as a wagering provider, even though it's still got the exclusive shopfront access. This is about giving people information and then being able to do something with it. And people will take that information and they will do it. And, I won't go so far as to say everyone bets. It's only about 25% of the population, except for Melbourne Cup, when everybody does. But people use these apps. They get information, they get services, and we need to understand this is where it's going. When I talk about some of these things as though they're happening right now, they are happening for some individuals, but not everyone. But if we look to 5 or 10 years, that's why this 15-year thing's ridiculous. We could go in 5 years of making these meters producing data every second to hundreds of app developers putting things on people's phones that would enable them to turn their car charger on and off when the energy's cheap, being able to use their vehicle to home, vehicle to grid access on their car to do different services, being able to turn their pool pumps on when the prices were negative. These things would happen automatically, and people will do it. You've only got to give people a bit of a chance and they'll have a crack.
A couple of thoughts for me on this. I mean, I think, a key difference between wagering and energy consumption is that energy is an essential service. And, we're in a situation right now where when you get a smart meter, they're putting on a prohibition for a set time period where they can't move you on to a time variant rate. But still today, depending on your retailer, you can automatically be sent to a time of use tariff. And customers that have these meters are getting no useful information about how to change their consumption. And so I agree with Andrew that there's a lot of value in prices to devices and in real-time access for super fast, capable machines. We have to, however, design an energy system for all Australians. There is a existing inequity in the system where we continually design products for the same 20% of customers who right now are receiving 80% of the benefit. And there are benefits from electric vehicles, batteries, used by a handful of customers or half of customers or whatever to your neighbor who doesn't have that technology. You bring their cost down. So I'm all for all the CER we can get or a narrow slice as well. But we have to design this system, and we have to design the solutions to this system for all customers. I mean, the thing that I am dismayed by, to a certain extent, in the directions paper is that it really focuses on this use case of machine prices to devices without thinking about the needs of that household that's been put on a time variant rate and has no idea what to do. And we're not providing any solution for that. And so it's not just about energy dashboards, and it shouldn't be. It should be much more useful than energy dashboards historically. I have my own experience with energy dashboards.
Brian, and if I could add to that, Brian, before Tim starts, the other thing that I think is worth bearing in mind, I totally agree with you on the demand-based tariffs. That's just one example of a lot of reforms that there's a lot of support for, I think. So, for example, looking at South Australian power networks and how they introduced dynamic operating envelopes as a precursor to emergency backstops. Good approach. And without data at, I think at least every 15 minutes, kiss goodbye to dynamic operating envelopes. So we really need to bear in mind here that if we give away this or if we're comfortable with not having this functionality till 2040, we're also saying implicitly that we're comfortable with a lot of other reforms not going ahead for 15 years.
Okay, guys, I've got to make something really clear that I thought I made in my opening statement clear. It is not one solution. We are not one amorphous mass of consumers or customers or anything else. There's a broad spectrum, and we have to look really carefully at the equity issues and how the people that can't do it. Someone who is living in a flat has limited flexibility. So the idea of even time of use tariffs being applied to them is probably inequitable, because the thing is, what we should be trying to do is actually focus moving flexible load, not inflexible load. The trial that Plus ES delivered in a technology solution through a smart meter that AGL used to test domestic hot water during the middle of the day, delivered hot water to the customer and $63 worth of benefit to the customer. It was $480 benefit to AGL. There's something wrong there in them having access to the data and the control and the services around it, and the consumer not doing it. CET technology, which Ream uses, in the same way in South Australia, delivered a $700 benefit to a home by optimising their energy use around self-consumption and hot water. So we have to think about how these things all come together. And we shouldn't have to be saying it's everybody this, everybody that. We need to understand about bifurcation of our loads, the different responsibilities. There is no future energy system without a network. Like in the next 50 years, if we can work out that how everybody can be off grid, I'll be really, really surprised, but I'll be dead, so it won't matter to me. What we will need to do, though, is to make sure that everybody stays on the grid. So we start using virtual NIMIs to make sure I can, energy storage as a service. I can't do energy storage as a service. I can't export 500 watt seconds from my house to be captured at the pole down the street as 500 watt seconds if I don't have real-time data of the meter telling me you got 500 watt seconds in that second. The data transaction side of handling that is stuff we do day in, day out with banking. Like Google tracks us and know where we are on our phone all the time. This stuff is easy. If I want to go and plug my car in on the street and charge it off my rooftop solar, whether it's outside my house or 5 blocks away where I work, I can do that with real-time data and virtualization. That is digitization of the grid. And it should be open to all of us. Energy is fungible. Darren, I can't sell you my electron. Potentially, even if I ran an extension cord from my house to yours, which is some considerable distance, I couldn't really do it. So we've got to think much more clearly about where we're going with this. And if it is digitalisation, if it is transactive energy, if it is the ability for me to be able to charge my car anywhere, to charge my car away from home and bring it back in the evening and then use it at my house, that's about making the maximum use of the network and the fact that I've paid a subscription and I've delivered an outcome. It's about energy fungibility, and consumers getting the benefit of that at the moment is the exclusive privilege of generators and retailers. And I don't see why it should be.
Thanks, Tim. Let's just have another couple of questions, and if anybody else would like to follow up, maybe just direct it to a particular panelist. So David Prince asked, why is access so difficult? So would one of the other panelists like Darren, would you like to speak to that one from a regulatory perspective?
I will defer to Andrew on this because his experience is far more vast than mine on this.
I was just about to respond to David. It's not difficult. I guess we are constrained by some legacy technology. Power meters, it's a very difficult business making power meters. They are highly regulated, commodity hardware. There's putting in an extra serial port is a decision which probably takes a lot of people to make when they're going to be making millions of these things. So we are constrained. Obviously, in recent times, that whole development process has gotten a lot easier, a lot more fluid. So we have seen some innovation. For example, Telehub, I think, have innovated quite a lot with their own meter developments and whatnot. So it's not that that's not possible. But in principle, there is nothing technically difficult about real-time data access at the meter. Yep. And I know that the AEMC, whilst it's intimated, it is not clear that they're talking about data at the meter, so on the site. If data through the metering provider's back end is also, some metering data providers through the retailer already offer some API access. The difference with real-time data is that it would increase the volume of data being transferred through the internet, from the site through the internet. So there would be additional costs. I would like to see the AEMC talk about minimum standards in a much clearer way. I think, and also there should be very clear guidance on the types of technical protocols and connection options that should be supported, so that we avoid, for example, being led into inaccessible industry protocols which are not readily used by the consumer. Fortunately, these days we have plenty of those which are cyber secure and easily managed and would integrate with the home network and all that sort of stuff. And that's perfectly feasible right now. That would involve some additional cost in some cases. But look, most smart meters in the market right now, with no changes, just with some software configuration, could provide much higher frequency data than is currently made available at the meter. So that's a long answer, but my short answer is that it's not difficult at all. It's about the governance. It's about the it's about the ownership. It's about access to services. That's really what's going on here.
That's a great, really detailed answer. Really appreciate that, and also the positivity of that. It's always nice to end on a positive note. And I mean, this has been a super engaging event, and I'd love to ask other questions as well. And I'm sure everybody else would. David probably would like to ask a few questions. I know that were at least a couple of questions on why the difference between access and ownership, and why that's, the philosophy behind that and why that's particularly important. I'm not sure if we've got time to explore that, but if anybody's got a 1 minute answer to that.
Well, how about I don't know if we could do reactions or something, getting people to raise their hands so that you can see it varying at least as to who's raised hands. But who thinks the data is theirs versus that it's somebody else's?
I should say raise your hand if you think it's yours.
There you go, it's mine. We'll just click raise hand.
Yeah.
Everyone click raise hand if it's your data, and don't if it's you think it's someone else's.
Interesting.
Well, there's only 22 people online. The highest number I've seen is 14, but I've got to find another few pages.
Yeah, no, I think 14, 15. 15 is it. Yeah, we should have asked this earlier when we had just over 40 people on.
I guess
any of the other 9 want to open their mic and say why they think it's someone else's?
I'm not sure it's relevant, Tim.
Well, it is relevant. It really is relevant, because the thing is, these people.
It's angels dancing on the head of a pin. It's about who can access and use it.
Yeah,
No,
I think
because I've got to give consent. If it's my data, I've got to give consent. And the thing is, I made the point before, IntelliHub's valuation is multiples of what AGL is, because they're exploiting our data. And I've got a problem with that. You know, if they were delivering value and services with it, but their focus and the problem with the whole power of choice reforms and putting retailers as the contracting party is, the contractors, the retailers are not going to act in our interest to save money. And I don't blame them. They shouldn't. Their objective is to make money. And if I was a shareholder in AGL or Origin or whatever, that's what I'd be telling them. Or if I was the Chinese company owning Energy Australia, I'd be telling that too. Right? The one group of people that I do think have the potential to have our interests at heart are DNSPs, because they're regulated to support us for the lowest community cost of energy.
So I'm going to have to run, but I think it's been a great panel, and you know, I think everybody that I've heard sort of agrees that there's a lot of value to be harnessed here if we can just get. I actually would have answered that question differently about the actual AEMC process. I think the AEMC has a hard job. I think this is a difficult topic because of the political aspects of it, and data is an abstract idea. It's difficult to make concrete and meaningful to people, and so I wish them the best. But I think that, you know, the fundamental issue here is we've got to find a way to make this work for everybody, or for everyone to benefit from real-time data access, and I hope the AEMC, you know, endeavors to do so.
Thanks, Brian. Great spot to finish up on, and I'll just hand over to Craig just to do our last words and next steps. Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, I'll try and be brief, because I realise that, yes, we have gone over and everybody does have to head off. I'm not sure why it's not picking me up on the screen, but anyhow, I hope everyone can hear me.
We can see you. It's the other way around.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so thank you all for listening and participating. I think one of the key things that I actually picked out of it, or one thing that I think is, you know, there still seems to be, I suppose, well, there's certainly going to be a lot of debate, and I think behind that there's got to be a process of education as to, you know, to what, you know, particularly into relation to what data will be available, before then we can work out, you know, who's going to access it. You know, one of the common, you know, phrases that I always hear with people when they talk about data is whether, you know, it's behind the meter or in front of the meter. You know, what data are people actually going to get access to, and is it the whole picture? But, you know, as I said, it's going to be certainly a long discussion, and yeah, certainly hopefully it will be resolved well within 15 years. Yeah, this is the second of an expert panel and webinars that Marianne and I've been involved in. And it's the idea behind them is basically to try and get the best minds together in the sector and try and, you know, create debate, which is something, you know, which was mentioned earlier on with the Australian Institute of Energy, and that's, you know, what I see our role is creating debate within the energy sector. So Yeah, we've got a business model supporting this, through leadership and through not-for-profits and think tanks, and that's being explored even greater at present with a number of research organisations that Marianne's working on. So if anyone's interested in supporting the model moving forward, please reach out and contact either of us. So once again, thank you very much for listening and participating. I don't think I've actually ever participated in a webinar that's had so many comments. My computer's been beeping at me non-stop and it's still going. Thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you at these events in the future.
Thanks, Craig. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
Fantastic
Thanks, everybody.
panel. Thank you.
Charlie, enjoyed
Amazing.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.